I'm Islamic and I agree with Sneeko about God and saying how Muslims worship God above all things. I respect all of that.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. I was sent a stream featuring Aidan Ross, Andrew Tate, Sneeko and Nick Fuentes. As most of you will know, all of these guys are no strangers to controversy. However, I think a positive was seeing the Muslims on the panel, Tate and Sneeko, after their recent public spat, being respectful towards each other while having a discussion about points they disagree on, as well as just talking about religion in general. Of course, with Aidan being Jewish and Nick being Christian, it was interesting to hear different perspectives from different faiths also. Let's take a look at the first clip.
That's why Muslims have an advantage.
Yeah.
Because Muslims, they put women in like a burqa. They put a woman in a niqab. They say, shut the up. Here's an Etch-a-Sketch. Go over there, write out your answers with the Etch-a-Sketch, and I'll read them to the camera. I don't know if you saw that. And people are like, this is horrible. It's like, it's preferable. Maybe it's too far, but it's preferable to what we have now. That's what makes Islam attractive, because it's so conservative and traditional. And here it's the opposite. The women are fat, they're obnoxious, they swear, they're rude, they bring nothing to the table, they don't want to put out, and men tolerate it.
In the West, we're now run by the feminine. It's a matriarchy, head to toe. It's a complete feminine mindset. And now we have a matriarchal society, the West, which is going to be competing against the patriarchal societies. And this is what's going to happen. This is why Islam is going to conquer the world. This is why white people are going to go extinct.
The reason that the birth rate is declining is because the guys are addicted to porn and because a lot of them live by feminist ideals.
So of course the discussion would start in regards to women. Nick Fuentes is no friend of Islam. In a recent viral video on X, he said a lot of disrespectful things about Islam and Muslims. A lot of it was down to ignorance and the Christian nationalist outlook he has. However, despite his prejudices, he conceded that Islam is attractive to him as a Christian due to how conservative it is as a religion. And although his language was harsh, I think he made a relevant point that non-Muslim women in the West generally have a lot of issues due to a lack of following a proper value system. And that is applicable to cultural Muslim women in the West who don't adhere to Islam also, with Christianity and Judaism being very watered down by liberal values and only practiced properly by a minority of people. Therein lies the problem. Those faiths are too loose and don't have the pull to compel their followers to submit to God because they're false religions. Any woman that practices Islam, which has been enforced by a man who is the head of the household, knows what is expected of her in terms of respect, modesty, as well as her responsibility to her husband and children. Both Tate and Sneeko were in agreement that men in the West are weak due to following the same liberal values as women over religion, which leads to them chasing degenerate life-destroying activities. Let's take a look at the next clip.
Sneeko was telling me that there's Muslims that live in Israel.
That's true.
Yeah. And Christians.
Yeah, you're right about Jerusalem used to be a really traditionally mixed area. Al-Aqsa Mosque is in Israel as well.
Israel, they go and bomb everybody, and they say, well, we were out there defending ourselves.
Yeah,
Point being is they take that to this wild extreme where they say, in order to defend ourselves, we need our own country. In order for us to have our own country, we need to be terrorists like the early Zionists. In order for us to defend our country, we have to invade our neighbors. We have to machinate and do lobbying in the United States. Like in the 73 war, Israel was almost defeated by the Arabs, and the Prime Minister of Israel said, if America doesn't send us this giant airlift of weapons, we'll just nuke everybody.
Andrew, I think everyone's with everyone, right? So, like, for example, you introduce yourself and you're like, oh, he's, a Muslim, whatever, you guys will say something. You guys have that in common. It's not like it's some type of like cult.
I'll argue right here that Muslims are loyal to Islam above most things as well, which just adds to the problem. England, where I grew up in a town which was 80% Muslim, Luton, and Muslims are loyal to Islam above they are loyal to the government and above their loyalty to England and above their loyalty to most things. They're loyal to Islam above all things. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be at all. I'm saying that they are. You have to be logical and have conversations without getting emotionally invested like a child and sit and say, okay, do you want X amount of people inside of a country, X amount of subsect of the populace which are loyal to something different than the country itself, which will change the face of the nation forever? That's the conversation, because everyone's loyal to something. If you have a football team, you have black people, white people, Muslims, Jews, everyone on the same football team. They're loyal to the football team. They all try and win. That's fine, great. But when you're talking about a country, when you have people coming to the country who are loyal to things besides the country and they're prepared to exploit the country for the benefit of that group instead, then you have to ask yourself, do you want those people in the country at all?
Muslims are always going to show allegiance to God in front of the nation.
Correct.
There's nothing that's more important than God. And that's why I see the issue, because that's why I know that Judaism is a false religion. And the same with why I think Christianity is a false religion. But Islam is only pure loyalty to God and God alone. The reason that Judaism, why there's an issue with the power, because I never said it was all Jews that are, I think it is. I think it's the Zionists that show allegiance to the racial aspects of Judaism rather than the religious aspects. And there is no racial aspect in Islam. You're right. You're right. As long as you're Muslim, then we're all the same under God.
You're right.
I see what Nick is doing and why it's commendable. What we've disagreed upon this and why I think that there's a small flaw is that he sees the issue with Zionism and how ethnicity is tied to faith, and it's almost like he wants to do the same thing. And I would like to see what his response to this is. But you see the Zionist problem and how it's tied to ethnicity and faith. And so you talk about how we need white Christians, white Catholics, but there's no idea of whiteness, or there's no idea of race that's written into Catholicism.
Yeah, I mean, my response to that is what we were talking about earlier. There is a tension between the fact that, you're right, Islam and Catholicism are both universal religions, meaning anyone can be a part of it. Judaism is not. Judaism believes that they are a people. If you're according to Jewish law, if your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. And they really don't encourage conversion. A lot of people don't even recognize conversion. A lot of Jews don't. That's why on Israel, Citizenship is awarded on the basis of ethnicity. They call it birthright. If you're born a Jew, you'd be a citizen of Israel. Catholicism says anyone that gets the sacraments is a Christian, and Muslims believe anyone that says the Shahada and does the almsgiving and all those things, you're a Muslim. And the tension is, does that abrogate nationhood and race? And I would say it doesn't. There are distinct, discrete nations. There are real nations. And, a country can have immigrants and take refugees and things like that, but the refugees have to, it takes generations for them to be seen as equal. It says that in the Catechism. Aquinas says that. When America is like 10% white, it's not going to be more Catholic. It's not going to be more Christian. It's going to be barbaric, chaotic. There's nothing in our religion that says we have to accept it. Race is real too, and nationhood is real too. And even within Christendom, you have nations, just like within Islam. You have a caliphate, but right now you have nations, and there's different sects. You have Shiites and Sunnis and Alawites, and the Houthis are a different type. And, the thing with Zionism is different because they really do believe, according to Kabbalah and the Talmud, according to Rabbi Schneerson, who they believe, the Rebbe, they believe he's the Messiah. A lot of the Hasidic Jews do. He said that Gentiles don't have souls. Like, we're not ensouled in the way that Jews are. And that's why they say we have the Noahide laws, and they have to abide by the Talmud and the Mishnah and all that stuff. So it is like baked into the cake with them. It's an ethno-religion. So the religion and the race are inseparable. By the way, that's why they're given to hatred. They write articles and they say there's a virtue in hating Palestinians. When October 7th happened, they said, kill them all, finish the job. They're inflicting collective punishment. And that's because they don't value human life the same way. A lot of them don't. Catholics say, even our enemies, we pray for them.
I have to say, Brother Sneako is representing Muslims well. Even when Aidan asked him about Muslims being in Israel, he knew about Al-Aqsa Masjid being there, and his answer to Tate's strange stance on favouring one's country over one's religion was spot on. After Nick's accurate rant on the evil history of Zionism, Aidan made the point that Muslims are loyal to Muslims, like Jewish people are loyal to Jews. Andrew strangely replied with, that's the problem, and went on to say that Muslims are more loyal to Islam than they are to the country they live in, as if that's a bad thing. The majority of Muslims would say their loyalty is to God before anything and everything. With that statement, it seems Tate values his nationalist beliefs more than he does his religious beliefs, and this is a sin. His reasoning was that some Muslims may try to exploit their country of residence due to this allegiance to God over country. I would counter that with anybody that is a practicing God-fearing Muslim would pose no threat or cause any trouble. As Muslims, we are told we must follow the law of the land, so it would be the non-practicing people that would be the ones to watch for sus behaviour. Sneako was spot on with this response. He correctly said Muslims will always put God before a country because there's nothing more important to us than God. Sneako also made the point that Christianity and Judaism must be false religions due to the nationalist ideologies that are now mixed in with the modern versions of those faiths. He was right in making the careful distinction between Jewish people and Zionists when he said the racial aspect of Judaism is down to the Zionist members of that faith, and that Islam concentrates solely on the religious aspect, with race or ethnicity not being a factor whatsoever. Well done to Sneako for calling out Nick for mixing his own white nationalist ideology into Christianity, which we see a lot of people do these days. Sneako exposed Nick's hypocrisy by pointing out that despite Nick being against Zionism, he also practices separatism with the version of Christianity he preaches. But to be fair, it seems that these types of people have hijacked Christianity to justify their own prejudices. And Nick did say Christianity is supposed to be a universal religion like Islam, and that Zionism is on a whole different level of discrimination, which I agree with. Let's look at the next clip.
I'm Islamic, and I agree with Sneako about God and saying how Muslims worship God above all things. I respect all of that. But I don't see it as anti-Islamic for me to sit and say, me knowing how Muslims view Islam and knowing how we put that above all things, I understand why Christians wouldn't want us to come to their country. I am logical enough to understand why they wouldn't want people who do not respect their religion to the same degree they do, or don't even respect their laws. They respect Allah's law above the laws of the land. I don't think it's anti-Islamic to say I totally understand why they don't want us to come then. Is that anti-Islamic? What's wrong with that? That makes sense, right? Because it's loyalty to, I mean, if you're going to have a country, what you want is loyalty to the nation. So if you're a Muslim in Russia, because Russia is very multi-ethnic, you can be Islamic, you can be Christian. In fact, a lot of people are surprised by how Islamic Russia is. When I was in Moscow, I saw headscarves everywhere, like Turkey. It's extremely Islamic. But they're all Russian, and they all love Russia, right? But if you had a sect or a religion in Russia that viewed their religion as above Russia in all ways, I feel like then there'd be some difficulty there. I feel like they still manage to stay nationalistic even though there's different religions. So I understand why white Christians sit and say we don't want Muslims to come here. That doesn't mean I don't believe in Islam. I'm just not personally offended because I just understand their point of view. I don't see what's anti-Islamic about saying I get it.
Christians would agree with it. They would all put their faith above their nationalism at all times. I don't want white Christian or just especially Western nations to make the same mistake that Israel's making, and why they're the source of so much destruction in the world right now and so much warfare. Because if you put allegiance to your nation above allegiance to God, that's how things get corrupted. That's how you see the warfare that's happening right now. I mean, even then, when you're going off about what's bad about Israel and about how Zionists get corrupted because they don't want intermarriage or they don't want people to assimilate into their culture, aren't those like slight pushback? Aren't those two things that you agree with? Don't you not want people to race mix, and you also don't want much immigration? You don't want people to assimilate or change the white Christian identity in the West?
I don't think it's corrupt. You guys talk about corruption. That's like an Islamic theological thing. You talk about the corruption of the Bible and so on. I don't think it's corrupting at all. I think it makes sense because they view their bloodline as very special. And so that they're actually adhering to their religion. That's not a corruption of Judaism. That's a fulfillment of Judaism. You know, the whole Old Testament is about lineage. When Europe went out and colonized the world, we brought Christianity. And, you know, the New World was made Christian by the Spanish, and parts of Africa were made Christian by the European colonists. In the Catholic religion, there's nothing that says we can't exist as a nation. And Zionism, too, is particularly about the land. They say it's that land, that people, that temple, and restoring the temple so that they can get a Messiah and restart the sacrifices and then rule the world. So there's a victimhood that makes them the way they are. It is also this prophecy. Like, you know, if you read Jewish literature, they're obsessed. They're afraid of assimilation. It's not only that they're afraid of persecution, and they hate Catholic kings because Catholic kings persecuted them, and they hate the Tsar because the Tsar segregated them. And they hate Hitler because Hitler tried to genocide them. But what they also resist is assimilation. They don't want to intermarry. They don't want to adopt everybody's culture. And that's why they've persisted for thousands of years. They're preoccupied with that. And these religious communities, they're preoccupied with staying together, returning to the land, rebuilding the temple, and doing the sacrifices, because it's a temple and a land and a race-based religion. And without all those things, you don't have Judaism. And that's what makes it a real problem. When they run our country or they influence our country, it's like Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro cares more about Israel than America. And if America were at war with Israel, you know what side he would be on. Should he be influencing our politics? No. And so many of the conservative media, they're literally IDF, like Prager University, huge educational outlet. The CEO is a former Israeli intelligence operative. Do you think like foreign intelligence officers should be manipulating American politics? Obviously, there's a conflict of interest. And that's the problem. It's not a prejudice. I don't hate Jews for being Jews. I actually like them. You know, some of them are very funny and intelligent, but it's about loyalty. Are you loyal to country? Are you loyal to the people of Israel? For many Jews, it's the latter.
I think Andrew, despite him saying he agrees with Sneako and with how Muslims view Islam, comes across as disingenuous. He weirdly, as a Muslim, seems so concerned about the Christian point of view. Why doesn't he just let the Christians defend themselves? And why he's showing favour to Christians over his fellow Muslims? This is why a lot of Muslims are questioning whether Tate is a double agent in disguise. Tate gave an example of Russian Muslims being nationalistic. Trust me, if you ask any real Muslim anywhere in the world, in Russia, even in Muslim countries, even in Saudi Arabia, if they put God first before their country or race, the answer would be a resounding yes. To answer otherwise is a sin. Sneako made a similar point to mine, and he brilliantly gave Israel as an example of how putting your country or ethnicity before God is a recipe for disaster, due to the Zionist nationalist ideology practiced over there, resulting in genocide and ethnic cleansing of their neighbours. And I'd like to add, Jewish people who put God before nationalism are protesting against Israel and the oppression of other nations. Sneako once again pressed Nick on his nationalist version of Christianity. However, this time we saw Nick get defensive with his response when he said Muslims always think the Bible is corrupted. Listen, I'm pretty sure if you asked a lot of Christians about Nick's version of white nationalist Christianity, they wouldn't agree with it either. And although Nick may make good points about the negatives of Zionism, he is a bit of a bigot, which could it be more evident than from how he spoke about the European colonization of Africa, Asia and South America, resulting in centuries of theft, enslavement and oppression, as if it was a good thing. I did, however, agree with him on Ben Shapiro and Prager University being more Israeli than American, and that they should have no influence over Western politics or media at all. And also he expressed no prejudice against Jewish people, only Zionists. Let's roll the next clip.
Isn't it a bit hypocritical to say to Christians that as long as people are Christian, they are okay to come into white Christian nations? Considering that even in the Islamic world, we still have countries and we still have borders and we still have sects, like Iran and Iraq, and these countries don't even like, a lot of them don't even like each other. A lot of them have gone to war. Like in the Islamic world, we don't say you're Muslim, so everyone's allowed everywhere. In fact, Qatar and Bahrain and Kuwait and some of the richest Islamic nations have the strongest immigration there is. And Dubai doesn't just, UAE doesn't just let anyone in who's Muslim. No, you have to apply and you have to do it right. And you have to do it by the law and you're not allowed to break the border. And so I just feel like when we say as Muslims, we put Islam above countries, so as long as you're Muslim, everything's fine. I don't know if most Islamic nations even do that. Isn't that just a lie to try and once again convince Christians to just genocide the white race? On a serious point, like what Islamic country, and this is a genuine question, as a Muslim, what Islamic country puts Islam above everything else? Because there's tribes in Afghanistan, there's tribes in Iran. Iran is I mean, I'm not saying the country can't be unified with different ethnicities, they are, but the ethnicities are still recognized. The ethnicities still exist. There's still country borders. There's still immigration laws. There's still all the things that we tell the West are not allowed to have.
And to take that a step further, when Nick is saying about Jews not wanting to intermarry, etc., that a lot of that exists within Muslim countries themselves. There are people in Iraq who don't describe themselves Iraqi. They say they're Kurds. We're Kurdistan. We need our own country. We need Kurdistan. I'm only going to marry a Kurdish woman because I want to have Kurdish kids. All Muslims, all from the same country, all holding Iraqi passports. There are certain sects even within Islam and Muslim countries that don't intermarry and won't date people from outside of their own little culture and their own little area anyway.
So isn't it a massive psyop to then say to Christians, they're a Christian from Rwanda, so just let them come. It's all going to be the same because you're all Christian? Because Muslims don't do that.
Just let in Christians. I'm saying the most important thing has to be the brotherhood within the Ummah. It's not nationalism. There's nothing that says that you can't be nationalistic, but that's what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that's what he was sent to separate. But there were all these tribes in the Arabic region, different pagan religions divided from that. When people put their nationalism first, when they said this tribe is the most important thing, that's how they ended up worshiping idols. That's how they ended up being divided. Islam came and that united so many people across the world. And once again, the biggest Islamic country is not even in the Middle East. It's in Indonesia.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying that I try to be fair and balanced in all things. I agree with you. But when I talk to Muslims and they say the Ummah and Islam above all things, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Saudi Arabia is literally bombing Yemen. Literally. I feel like there's a degree of hypocritical talk that we use, but we don't talk about it really with other Muslims because we understand it. But when we come to Christians who come along and say, you should just accept everyone, you should, like, as long as they're Christian, I feel like it's hypocritical, and I feel like it's just another attack we use on Christians. The problem with the Christian faith is that it's based on forgiveness. It's based on endless tolerance. That's what it's based on. So I feel like in many ways Christians are easy to take advantage of. I don't know if you saw our protest when we protested what they said they did about Jesus at the Olympics. I'm the most Christian nation in the world. It took me and my brother to do that. And the other Christians I knew, I was telling them about it, and they were all like, yeah, they'll see in the afterlife. It's very placid. There's too many cheeks to turn. And I just feel like sometimes when we talk to Christians as Muslims, or people in general when you talk to Christians, you're just weaponizing their tolerance against them. And especially sometimes it can be hypocritical. I'm trying to think of an Islamic nation where I can turn up and say, well, I'm a Muslim, just let me in. And I don't think that's going to happen. And you'll see a lot
of Islam, because one thing we all agree upon, even if the leaders, they make mistakes, and we all make mistakes, the leaders are not representative of the religion as a whole. So we all understand, even though that Saudi may be bombing Yemen, or there's divisions between Shia Sunni, we still believe that there's nothing that is supposed to unite us besides Islam. That's always going to supersede nationalism.
Tate once again kissed up to Christians like an undercover spy. He said Qatar, Bahrain and Dubai have some of the strongest immigration policies in the world, to make the point that Western Christians should have the same. Once again, Andrew, as a Muslim, why are you so concerned? People from the Gulf nations Tate mentioned generally don't immigrate to the West. They're not third world nations. If anything, Westerners are actually immigrating to the Gulf. Tate displayed a stereotypical nationalist ignorance by equating Muslim countries with the religion of Islam, by stating Muslim countries don't put Islam before everything else, as if the questionable politicians in those nations represent Islam. He gave Afghanistan and Iran versus Iraq, as well as Saudi versus Yemen as an example. Sneako's answer was again spot on when he said that the leaders of these countries, as well as sectarian divisions, don't represent the religion of Islam, and that putting nationalism first causes people to fall into sin and separatism, and also that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, preached against this. Andrew's brother Tristan said that within Muslim countries, people of different ethnicities prefer to marry within their cultures and races. This is permitted in Islam. However, Muslims can marry any Muslim of any race. So again, this is no bearing on Islam as a religion. This is just personal preference. To be fair, Andrew did point out that the failings of Christians are of their own making, due to them not defending or upholding their religion. Let's take a look at the last clip.
I use Dubai as an example. It's not a completely fair example because it only has 5 million people and America has 400 million. So it probably wouldn't work when you extrapolate it out. But one thing Dubai does have is, because it does have unifying factors, Dubai's 80% immigrants, all different religions, all different colors from all different parts of the world. And a lot of it is third world as well. And it's still extremely safe, even though you have third worlders there. What unifies people? Well, we can talk about the fact that people want money, but that's the same reason they go to America. You can talk about the fact that people earn more money than they do at home, and that's the same as America. But I feel like Dubai has one other thing. The state religion and the native populace are respected and feared. And I feel that's the one thing America does not have. You do not go to Dubai and insult Islam, and you also don't go to Dubai and insult the Arabs. Ever. In fact, if you get in a car crash and you hit an Arab, it was your fault. No matter what. You did it. So maybe if America just had enforced respect for the state religion. In America, you can't do that. You're saying you don't have to respect our religion and you don't have to respect our native populace. Can that even ever function long term, to invite all these different people that nothing can unify them? You can't find any cause they'll unify behind besides literally nuclear war.
It definitely is a complex issue, but I think a good example of how this could work is a nation like Bosnia. Bosnia is, although it's predominantly Muslim, it's got to be 99% white. And when I was there, I went 3 times in about a month, because nobody looked at me as if I was an other. As soon as I said salam alaikum, they said alaikum salam. They looked at me as if I was one of them, because that always would transcend it.
The reason for that is because you're so rare. If a million Arabs turned up in Bosnia, the Bosnians would have a problem with that.
When you're there as a Muslim, you're not the face of what's scary to them. But Andrew's right. If 20,000 Arabs moved there, or 20,000 people who look like you moved there, they would see you as a threat. People they're afraid of look just like them, but worship a different God.
You brought up the example in Bosnia. If there were 20,000 Arabs that came in, they would feel differently. They actually did. During the Bosnian genocide in the early 90s, Arabs came to help fight the war against the Serbs. So that's a good example that although Serbs and Bosnians are technically of the same ethnicity, within that war, there was more unity between the Muslims there. And the Arabs there didn't even speak the language. They came to fight there just because they saw that the genocide was about faith and it wasn't about ethnicity.
You know, what's interesting about the Israelis, they wrote something in the 80s. There's an article that was written back then by this guy named Oded Yanan, and he analyzed all the weaknesses of the Muslim countries. He actually said, he was a senior advisor to someone who eventually became the prime minister. He said, actually, the real threat to Israel aren't the Muslim countries at all. He said, it's moral relativism, it's communism, it's nuclear weapons. He said, Muslim countries are only the imminent threat. He said, but they will never last. And in each case, he said, the systemic weaknesses of every Muslim country was their diversity. He said, Syria has Alawites, Kurds, and Sunnis. Iraq has Sunni, Shia, and Kurds. He said Lebanon is realistically like 5 countries in one. He said Saudi Arabia is not even a real country. It's all these tribes and foreign workers ruled over by a very precarious king. Egypt has way too many Christians. Libya has a small population. And this guy, and this is formed the basis of Israeli foreign policy. This is your Iraq war, Syrian civil war. He said we're going to systematically rip apart these countries on the basis of their diversity.
A lot of people from the left and the right, the first time that we're really agreeing on something major is the issue of Israel. People see the debate stage, they see J.D. Vance and Tim Walz get on stage, and immediately there's just a glaze off for Israel. Same thing, Trump right now. Of course, a lot of us, we agree with Trump on quite a bit, but we're wondering why do we see an equal amount of Israeli flags as American flags? If you're going to talk about an existential threat that people are going to unite against, I think we're seeing it right now. What is going to get rid of all these problems that's destroying the West right now when it comes to feminism, when it comes to Zionism, when it comes to liberalism, is some sort of return to tradition, is some sort of religious doctrine.
Andrew Tate just seems driven to convince people that dedication to a land with invisible borders governed by upper-class crooked politicians is somehow more beneficial than putting loyalty to God first. Yes, we should all be law-abiding citizens that are kind to our fellow humans regardless of race or religion, but we should never put God after any man-made ideology, country or concept. Again, he gave the example of Dubai not allowing people to insult Islam or Arabs to make the point that the West don't have that in place, when they actually do, because you can't insult the rainbow community or Zionists. Sneakle made a great point when he said a fantastic example of a white Muslim nation with a flourishing Islamic society is Bosnia, where Muslims, despite being majority white, love their fellow Muslims regardless of race or ethnicity. The Tates desperately tried to counter this by saying it's rare for Bosnians to see a non-white person, hence why they are so friendly to Sneakle, and that if thousands of Arab Muslims were to go there, the Bosnians would all of a sudden become racist. It was great to see Sneakle call their bluff with the historic fact that thousands of Arab Muslims did go to Bosnia to fight side by side with them, and that they had nothing but love for each other. And Nick also made the point that historically Zionists actually acknowledge the diversity of Muslim nations, but see it as a weakness. And props to Sneakle for saying that opposition to Zionism should be a uniting factor for us all. I would say Brother Sneakle won this very respectful debate and represented Muslims and Islam really well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him and guide us all. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, where we as Muslims can speak freely and without censorship about issues like this. And remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah, Jazakallah khair.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.